Last week, we discussed the story of Sarah laughing about hearing giving birth at her age. And I briefly mentioned the moment when Isaac is born within Genesis chapter 21. And later we hear that he is weaned. This would have taken place at about 3 years old, which means he is strong and healthy and expected to have a full life. As a result, Abraham celebrates this milestone. There's a moment where Isaac and Ishmael are playing, and Sarah sees this and has a realization. Let's go back a few chapters where Sarah, who doesn't believe that she will ever give birth to a baby, takes matters into her own hands. Sarah asks Abraham to have a child through her maidservant, Hagar. It occurs as Sarah hopes it would, and Hagar gives birth to a boy, Ishmael, who is seen as Abraham's firstborn son. As a result, Sarah worries about Isaac's inheritance and ultimately what her future will look like now. Abraham can adopt Ishmael as his firstborn son, which he had done for about 14, 15 years of his life at this point. But that would also mean that a greater portion would be offered to Ishmael, and as a result, Hagar. Because of this, Sarah makes another request. She wants Abraham to send Ishmael and Hagar away. And this situation has so many layers involved, it is surprising to hear that God tells Abraham to do as Sarah has said. For starters, Abraham is distraught at Sarah's request and wrestles what to do before God assures him that Hagar and Ishmael will be okay. And again, at this point, Ishmael is a teenager, and having grown up with his father, and in many ways the household as a firstborn son. Historically, Sarah has not been kind to Hagar, but there's no history or mention of Sarah treating Ishmael terribly until this moment. The text tries to imply that Sarah saw Ishmael being a bully, but there's also the word that was used for Ishmael and Isaac being together as Isaacing, right? Isaac means God, the one who laughs. So it could be a jest, or she saw them hanging out, or again, she saw that Ishmael would take the place of Isaac. If Ishmael is around, even with God's promises of who Isaac would be in relation to God's covenant, as a firstborn son, he would have special privileges and inheritance, as I mentioned. And although Sarah's request seems harsh, given a woman's status in that time, even that of a wife, she wanted to make sure that her future was secure. As a reminder, in that time, not being able to have children was seen as the fault of the woman. Until Isaac's birth, there might have been much talk and speculation behind Sarah's back about her inability to give birth. Having a boy was even more important within this culture, right, as Abraham's line would then live on. She had finally fulfilled her one essential duty and would help raise Isaac. But even with God's promises, now that Isaac is weaned, she'll help raise him, but she's done her job. She's no longer needed. She's the wife and the mother of the household, but even then, much of Isaac's future is based on Abraham. Despite the harshness of the situation and Abraham's distress, God promises him that Ishmael and Hagar will be protected. In the wilderness, at an earlier time, in the wilderness after they are shunned, God calls Hagar by name and shares that there will be a future for Ishmael and as a result, herself. There is provision through water, and then Hagar, as a presumably single mother, raises Ishmael among her people and then helps him find a wife. The only time a mother does this within the scriptures. And he becomes an expert hunter. Ironically, Ishmael's name means God hears. And the moment we hear in the text when he cries out, God indeed hears him and calls this woman who was enslaved by name and promises her a future and a hope. We don't know all that occurs, but there is provision. There is a way that is made for Hagar despite this situation. And not only do they just simply survive, they thrive. As one commentary noted, God works with individuals on the scene. God does not perfect people before deciding to work through them. God may see Sarah's strategy, however inadequate, as the best possible way into the future for this particular moment in the life of this particular family. End quote. It's kind of ironic that the person who initially caused this situation in the first place continues to unravel and make matters worse. But again, we know why. We know that out of her own fears and anxieties that are valid and real, and that her response is probably not unlike those of her time. It also may show that the structures that us humans have created do not allow for people to truly live freely, but in navigating them are made to respond in ways that, again, make sense to their own protection and livelihood. Especially for women, we know that women and mothers can be penalized for their actions done out of survival. However, we see that in a weird way, Abraham, though he may not understand or agree with Sarah, he listens to her. And God redeems this situation despite what occurs. Again, we see that in Sarah, there is some sense of power, right? Whether that was culturally, Hagar was her responsibility and her decisions on her life ruled, or that Abraham saw the blessing that was available for him as much as it was for Sarah and responded accordingly. And yet there's Sarah who sees firsthand the possibilities of God. Sarah sees God's compassion and goodness and is unable to share that with Hagar. In chapter 16 of Genesis, a pregnant Hagar flees, and in the wilderness, God finds her and tells her to go back home, not before letting her know again that her and her son will be blessed and protected and cared for. Again, Hagar thrives despite her circumstances, not thanks to them. For I can't imagine there's this possibility that Sarah could have made her fears and her anxieties known to Abraham, and Abraham could have spoken to Hagar and explained the situation, and Hagar probably would have understood. And that may have been the compassionate thing to do. I imagine there's a world where Abraham sends Ishmael and Hagar off with more provision than a little bread and water and enables them to be connected in some sort of way as the father that he wanted to be and was so saddened to depart from his own son. We know that he and Sarah are capable of doing great things for the stranger, and that should have been provided for his own blood. And still we see that God is faithful and good and calls Hagar by name, reminding us that God sees and hears those who may not always be seen and heard among the powerful. God cares for those who may not be on the inside or chosen, but cares for all. This story doesn't try to sanitize the persons of Abraham and Sarah, nor that once called by God, one is absolved of all decisions made. God does use a difficult situation for good. And again, it's not to say that the decisions made by Abraham and Sarah were right or should be heralded as examples in this moment. But it's a reminder of the complexity in humanity. And it is clear that in the psalmist, when they cry out in chapter 69, it's a reminder that God indeed hears. Hagar isn't told by God that she must forgive them before she's officially heard or provided sustenance. Despite Sarah's limited power, Ishmael nor Hagar are named by Abraham or Sarah in this story at all. And Abraham makes known that he only truly cares about his son. Who says the name Hagar in this story? God does. God, having heard her son and having encountered her before and knowing her status, God says, "Remember that I am here for you, and I see you as I did before." Who else saw people and sat with them and had a meal with them and acknowledged them in the fullness of their humanity, despite society's reflection or calling or decisions about their life and who they were, despite God's calling? Jesus did. Jesus modeled what can happen when people are seen and heard, and makes it known very clearly in his ministry that we are indeed to call out God. For he spends time in his own wilderness, in his own moments of solace and prayer, and reminding God of God's promises. He knows the scriptures, he knows Psalm 69, he knows that when you call on God, God will listen. God will see you. God will hear you. Let us ask God to open our ears and our eyes to see and hear people, especially those who have been marginalized, who've been pushed aside, who've been tossed out. For those who must navigate these systems we've created where people are treated less than, who have to make difficult decisions for themselves that affects, of course, not only themselves, but the people around them. And though we may not be able to change an entire system in a day, when we move in ways that are compassionate and merciful and graceful, know that we undermine the power that it holds. We know God hears us and has responded. Let us be God's hands and feet to ensure that all are indeed heard and seen by God. And let us respond in ways that Jesus has called us to this day. Alleluia and amen.